I do want to, before we get going this morning, explain that last week I did a bill introduction of 26 RS 3553 and mentioned that it was on behalf of Chris Van Metren. I was incorrect in that. I wanted to correct that for the record. That it's Doug Johnson, who's the chairman of KERA, that requested the introduction of that bill, 26 RS 3553. And I can't remember. I think that bill has been introduced already, but anyhow, just wanted to correct that for the record. Are there any bill introductions this morning, Senator Murphy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have RS 3944, and it's an act concerning data centers.
Committee, any questions or objections to the introduction of that bill? Data centers. Data center. Seeing no other questions, that bill is introduced. Any other bill introductions? Do you have one, Senator Francisco?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do not have a bill introduction, but I'd love to introduce my shadow for the day. She's here with my intern, and I'll ask her to stand, Kenzie Danicki. And she's a sophomore at Free State High School.
Very good. And
I'm really happy to have her with me today.
Kenzie, welcome to Federal and State Affairs. Hope you enjoy the day. Thank you, Senator. We'll move on to approval of minutes. Oh, do we have another bill introduction?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
No bill introduction unless the pages would like to bring something forward this morning. Something about free lunches forever. I don't know what. But yeah, I have the pleasure of as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, of 2 pages with me today. They're brothers. If you guys would stand up. They're from Randolph Blue Valley School District on the north side of Manhattan, and they're here today. And they are a sophomore and a 8th grader. And so if you'd please join me in welcoming Lee and Trent Taylor to the Senate. I would appreciate that, the Senate.
Thank you, Lee and Taylor, for being here today. Hope you enjoy the day, and welcome to Federal and State Affairs. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
All righty. We have some minutes that Angela sent out from February 4th, 5th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, and 16th. And hopefully you had a chance to review those. Do I have a motion on that? I know it's a bunch. Senator Blue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we approve the minutes previously stated.
Is there a second? Second from Senator Thomas. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The minutes are approved. Okay, now we're going to move on to hearing of HB 2437, and we'll have Jason give us a bill brief. Jason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 2437 establishes new law and amends several statutes regarding maintenance of the voter registration records in the state of Kansas. The bill was amended by the House Committee on Elections, and so you can see those amendments throughout the bill. The first thing the bill does, starting off sections 1 and 2, is direct the Secretary of State to conduct 2 checks each year and at least 1 check within 180 days prior to any federal general election of the statewide voter registration system against the federal SAVE system. That is the Systematic Alien Verification for Entitlements database that's administered by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. The checks are to determine eligibility to vote based on citizenship status. If there are any potential non-citizen matches that pop up after the checks, the Secretary is to notify the appropriate county election officer. Upon receipt of such information, the county election officer is then required to notify the voter, place the voter on a challenged or pending verification status, and confirm their eligibility to vote in the state of Kansas. If the voter is determined to be ineligible to vote, then they are to be removed from the voter rolls. Section 3 of the bill requires an annual report to be submitted to the legislature by the Secretary of State. detailing records that are checked, number of voters that are flagged as potential non-citizens, and the number of voters ultimately removed through this verification process, along with any recommendations for improvements to the statute or to the regulations. There is sections 1 through 6 are part of this new verification through the federal save provisions. There is a section 6. I will point out that if the save system ceases to allow for batch uploads or provide database searches by driver's license number or social security number at any time in the future, then these checks and this whole these statutes would become null and void. They would no longer have any effect, and the Secretary would not have to perform those checks against the save system upon that occurrence. The next section of the bill amends 25-2316C, which is a voter registration maintenance statute. The bill would require county election officers to send a confirmation notice to a voter if the information that's provided by the Division of Vehicles indicates that the voter has moved to a residence that's located outside the county in which they are registered. There are other instances in which a county officer sends a confirmation notice. This would be a new one added to the statute under House Bill 2437. The bill also directs the Secretary to use certain resources to maintain the voter registration records. This includes results of duplicate voter registration checks that are performed against the statewide voter registration records at least twice a year. Changes in residency that's provided by the Division of Vehicles at least once each quarter. List of deceased Kansas residents that the Secretary receives from the Social Security Administration at least once a year. And then at the Secretary's discretion, the Secretary can also obtain information on changes in residency from other federal or state agencies, from non-governmental entities, or from voter registration records that are maintained by other states. Finally, under this statute, the amendments provide that the county election officer is to remove the name of a voter from the voter rolls if the voter's name has appeared on a list of deceased individuals that's provided by the Social Security Administration and verified by other reliable means, or if the voter is declared deceased through a notarized attestation that's executed by an immediate family member. Just add some provisions to that statute. Third and finally, House Bill 2437 amends 25-2324, which is a relatively recent statute. Currently, the statute requires the Division of Vehicles to provide a list each quarter to the Secretary of non-citizens who have been issued a driver's license, for the Secretary to then compare that list to the statewide voter registration records to determine if any voters are ineligible to vote due to citizenship status. Under the bill, there would be a new provision on page 6 of the bill. You can see it that each quarter the division is going to be required to provide a list of licensees who have been subsequently issued a driver's license by another jurisdiction, another state. This then would be considered a change of residence by the licensee, and therefore that information, when it gets to the appropriate county election officer, the officer is to remove the voter from the voter rolls because they have changed residence and send them notice of that action, along with information that they can have their voter registration reinstated upon proof of residency in the state of Kansas. The bill passed in the House on a final action vote of 85-39. It would go into effect on July 1st this year if enacted, and I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Jason. Committee, any questions? Senator Blue?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jason, I was kind of hung up at the very top of your second page of your memo, talking about the division of vehicles whenever somebody would move outside of the county. Is that what you said? So I guess what I'm getting at, and maybe it's somewhere else in this bill or there's another bill that's discussing this, but if somebody moves, like I have a family member that moved one block over and they're in a totally different city council race. So now if they vote under that old address, they're not in that seat anymore. So are we discussing anything to do with that with the DMV?
No, and as you point out, yes, when you move, you should re-register to vote because it can change your precincts and who is your local representative. I'm going to defer to the Secretary of State's office on that particular provision and why it's just moving from the county and not a complete change of address. And I'll let the Secretary of State's office comment on that in their testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Fasquedo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jason. So currently, isn't this information, is it or is it not already under the Kansas Open Records Act? Or is that what we're?
So certain information could be obtained through an open records request. There is language in the bill that the information the Secretary of State obtains to verify the voter registration records would not be subject to the Open Records Act, and so it would be considered a closed record. So that is a new provision added on page 5 of the bill.
So, but isn't that duplication?
Not necessarily. Some of the information could be subject to an open records request. It depends on the information that's requested and who has custody of it, and I'd have to verify that through.
Yeah, and who?
All the exceptions of the Open Records Act.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, if I may. So who would have the right, or who would want to, who gets the right to request that information?
Anybody can.
So how do we protect your?
There are exceptions to the Open Records Act. And so then if a request comes for information that is exempted or accepted out of the Open Records Act, then the custodian of the records notifies the individual that those records are not public records and therefore are not subject.
So final question, Mr. Chairman, aren't we opening the door to people getting to really see how I cast my vote? We had an election. You know, what stops that in the future, or does this go that far? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I don't know that anything in this bill would release or have the transmission of any actual ballots cast by any voters or any ties to any voters who would cast those ballots. This would be information on the name and address of the registered voters or individuals on other lists to then compare against the voter registration list. And again, all that information under the bill would be accepted from the Open Records Act. So if there was a request made to the Secretary of State's office for that information, the Secretary would not have to disclose that because it would not be a public record.
Any further questions? Oh, Senator Dietrich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and maybe this is a better question for Clay, but Section 7, new language, and it's how you determine someone is deceased. It says the registered voters declare deceased in a notarized attestation of such declaration by a family member. Could my daughter declare me deceased if it was notarized? Just asking. But, I mean, in such form, I would hope it would be like a death certificate. What was the intent of that section?
Well, I'm going to defer to the intent to Mr. Barker with the Secretary's office in terms of the intent of that. I believe it's, because it's an attestation, you're essentially signing that, you know, under penalty of perjury because you're attesting to it with a notary in terms of the fact that you would be deceased. So, but with the form and using that form, I'm going to defer to the Secretary's office.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Jason. And up first, we have Clay Barker from the Secretary of State, who can probably fill us in on some of those things. Clay, welcome back to Fed and State.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Clay Barker, General Counsel for the Kansas Secretary of State. And the central theme of this bill, and it was drafted by the Secretary of State with help from some others, is voter roll maintenance, keeping the list of registered voters in Kansas updated. And I'm sure we've all heard people complain that we need clean voter rolls or complain about dirty voter rolls, and one side will say if the voter rolls aren't maintained, it can lead to fraud, and the other side will say if you're too aggressive, you will take off eligible voters who just may not have been that active with the voting system. And Kansas has, I believe, a pretty good system right now. Give credit to Mr. Caskey because he relentlessly pushes on the counties to use every tool we have constantly. And Secretary Schwab has been asked to go to Washington, D.C. and testify with one other Secretary of State to the House committee on Kansas's voter roll maintenance. As I assume I've been told, because it's kind of an example for the rest of the country. But I think we have a pretty good system, but the point of this bill is to try to make improvements to it. And just to give you some quick background, so federal and state laws govern voter roll maintenance, and there's a general concept that a state must use reasonable efforts, and the word reasonable is always open to interpretation, and the state can, or the election system can only use those processes that the state government authorizes it to use. It can't go beyond that, and this bill is trying to expand some of those tools. And the general policy of both all 50 states and the federal government is that you must meet the authorized factual predicate and then meet any legal notice and time requirements before someone can be removed from the voter rolls. And if in doubt, the name will stay on the voter rolls because you don't want to remove an eligible voter. The system is leaning to keep people on so you don't mistakenly remove someone. Again, voter roll maintenance is something done constantly. And just to give you the background numbers, there's about 2 million plus registered voters in Kansas. The 4 main reasons for removing voters: first is change of residency. In Kansas, every year on average, about 4% of the voters, or about 80,000, leave the state, and about another 80,000 move somewhere within the state, either in the same county or they change counties. And there's different procedures for each of those. About 28,000 Kansas registered voters die each year. That's the second most common reason to remove. Last year, 780 registered voters were removed because they were convicted of a felony, and citizenship removal is, for being a non-citizen on the voter rolls, is usually in the single digits. And sometimes that's a mistake. Sometimes like the Coldwater mayor is sort of the national poster child for this, was removed after being discovered. Okay, getting onto the bill has 3 goals. First is to provide some additional tools to the election system for voter roll maintenance. The second is for the legislature to help define the minimum standards for voter roll, for reasonable efforts on voter roll maintenance, like how often certain things must be done. And the last is the open records, which is a privacy. The idea is voter privacy there. We're not trying to hide anything, and I think that's been misconstrued a little bit, and I'll try to do a better job of explaining it. So first, on the new tools for voter roll maintenance, DMV records. So if someone changes, that goes to another state, Missouri, and gets a new driver's license, Missouri will tell Kansas, we've issued a driver's license to this person, and Kansas will cancel their Kansas driver's license. And that list will be sent to the Secretary of State, and then we go through the process of confirming that this person is no longer a Kansas voter, just by sending out confirmation notices, very similar to a change of address. And I think that would be a pretty accurate way of determining that someone has probably changed their voter residency, although residency for a driver's license and residency for a driver's license and residency for voting are not exactly the same. And they probably overlap 95% of the time, but some of your federal staff may live in Virginia and get a Virginia license, but they still are a Kansas voter because they plan to return. And we think that would be a useful tool to help find people that have moved. The second, the Social Security Death Index language was just clarified. We're already authorized to use that. We wanted to make it a little clearer, and I'll get into more detail about that in a bit. The death attestation is an idea we got from about 15 other states use this, and it's to solve the problem where someone comes in and says, my grandfather died 20 years ago and he's still on the voter rolls. And we'll say, well, we need proof before we can take him off, and the person doesn't know how to get proof. Now, if they fill out a form that will ask for a sworn statement that someone is deceased, and as much information as possible to identify an obituary, a death certificate, social security number, something the system can then follow up on, then we'll be able to remove those voters. So right now, to remove someone who's died, we either get the state death certificate, social security list, which is then validated, obituaries, as long as there's enough information, we can identify the voter, and now this death attestation is sort of is one more available tool. And the last was to clarify that felony removal, it says must be done within 5 days. That'll say within 5 business days, because 5 days would include weekends and holidays, and that's a little quick for many counties to do. So those are just 4 additional tools we'd like to have to do voter roll maintenance. The second part was defining what reasonable effort means, and many of the tools already provided to us by the legislature have a frequency put into the statute already, a quarterly report or something like that. And this just adds in minimal frequency. First is deduplication in the state would be done a minimum of twice a year. That's where at the Secretary of State level, we look at all 105 counties and try to find anyone that's in 2 counties, which means they've moved, and the older registration will be dropped. Because when you move between counties, you move to a new election jurisdiction, and you can be registered in both temporarily, but you can obviously only vote in one. The second is that this DMV change of address would come every quarter, so we could try to track people that have moved and send them confirmation notices to make sure that their address is updated if they've moved counties, or if they moved out of state, we can try to follow up and see if they'll come off the voter rolls. And with these confirmation notices, you mail it to the voter. If it comes back and the voter says, yes, take me off the voter rolls, they come off instantly. If it comes back addressee unknown, can't be forwarded, then that voter is marked as inactive. They could still vote if they show up, but generally that means they probably moved. We have to wait a certain amount of statutory time, then they can come off. But if the voter has no response, then there's nothing the system can do about that voter. That's why the DMV list would be a good supplement to this. The Social Security Death Index and non-citizen. Now, this is the federal SAVE program, not to be confused with the Save America bill. They're two separate concepts. But we send our entire voter rolls to the USCIS, Citizenship and Immigration Services, and they will send us back a report saying, these people may have died, they bounce it off the Social Security Death Index, and these people may not be citizens, and there'll be warnings on it that it's up to the state to follow up and verify. The list is going to be a lot larger than what's actually there. And then we follow up on that, and we'd have to ask for that at least once a year, and then give the legislature a report on what we've found. And then again, the DMV list is quarterly, which matches what the legislature's already given us permission to use as the temporary driver's license list, which are non-citizens who have driver's licenses in Kansas. And it also provides the Secretary of State some discretionary authority to find other reliable sources of information that we can compare to our voter rolls to see if someone's moved. And I want to emphasize that we never take one of these other lists, whether it's a Social Security Death Index or a list of people that may have moved, and take a voter off just on that. We compare the two databases. We have to be sure someone meets the statutory requirements before they're removed. It's just not, this person showed up on a list, take them off. And Mr. Caskey's staff spent a lot of time going through these lists. They have sort of screening processes, and then in the end, they do granular individual follow-up, especially for non-citizenship, which takes quite a bit of time to follow through, because what we found and what the SAVE program will concede is that a lot of the names are citizens. Maybe they were a non-citizen when they started, but they're a citizen now, and we want to go through the process and be very accurate. And that brings us to the last part of the bill, which is the KORA exemption. Right now, we get KORA requests from all sorts of groups wanting to know every name that SAVE has given us as a possible non-citizen. And I respond to those by providing a whole bunch of current KORA exemptions, but it's sort of, I have to cover the entire request by having different exemptions cover parts of it. And some of them are criminal investigation, personal correspondence, information of a personal nature that could be embarrassing or harmful, or possible civil action. And the reason we do that is if I get a list that may have Senator Thompson on it as a possible non-citizen just by some mistake, you don't want to put that out in public. That makes that voter could come under attack from neighbors or criticism, like, oh, this person's not a citizen, when in fact they are a citizen. And we want to go through our systematic process to figure out who may not be a citizen or who is actually dead. But once that person is removed from the voter rolls, that's a public record. If someone is flagged as inactive on the voter rolls, that's a public record. We're just trying to get one complete KORA exemption for all the processing we get from when we get a list from SAVE as we process it down, so the public doesn't see all the internal workings of our system. If we're doing a criminal investigation, we don't want to show people how we do it and how we verify things, so that could give a hint about how to avoid it. But the output is always a public record. We're not trying to hide the output. It's just that internal processing, and to avoid people being embarrassed by having their name thrown out. And you may have seen in the news, in other states like Texas, some of the names were thrown out immediately, and people were saying, I'm a citizen, I've been born in the United States, I I became a citizen 5 years ago. I don't know why I'm being targeted. That's what we're trying to avoid with this KORA exemption. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Clay. We do have one other proponent in person, so we'll probably hold for, well, you know what? I think we'll open for questions now. All this is fresh in the mind. Committee, any questions? Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I really appreciate all the efforts that the Secretary of State's office goes to. I think it's safe to say everybody in this room wants people to vote, but only people who are eligible to vote. So we want as many people to exercise their right to vote and be good citizens in doing so, in stewardship. And I have to tell you, you know, my mother passed away last year, and dealing with all of her trust and taking care of everything else and sending death certificates off. And I never once thought to notify the Secretary of State's office that my mother passed. So what you're saying is that you do get a list from the office saying that from Social Security, if somebody qualifies for Social Security, they send a list, you get that list, and you can go by that. But then what? Do you double check obituary or?
Senator, so there's a few reasons. First, we get a weekly death certificate list from the Kansas Department of Public Records.
Okay.
And that is sufficient to take someone off immediately because we trust the Kansas government's records on that. The Social Security Death Index, we were always allowed by state law to use it, but until last October, the federal government wouldn't give it to us, wouldn't allow us to use it. But now, because of an executive order, we are allowed to use it. For the first time, we ran the list. On that list, we always try to we tell the counties, find an independent validation. Go find an obituary, something somewhere that validates that you have the right person. And we remove 5,500 deceased. And those are people that died out of state. They could have moved, they could have been in a retirement home, in an accident somewhere else. And then obituaries is a fallback. Occasionally you'll find an obituary of someone who, for whatever reason, there wasn't a death certificate. So this adds the attestation, and it makes the Social Security Death Index a little easier for us to use as long as the feds keep allowing us to use it.
My last question, Mr. Chair, is, so then if I have a family member that moved, when my daughter went to NYU and then stayed in New York, in some states, you can vote, you change your voter ID to that I am a permanent resident here because I'm going to live here for 4 years to go to college. What is the rule in Kansas on that for a college student?
Senator, the way voting residency, and again, voting residency is a little different than, say, driver's license or taxing or in-state tuition, it has two parts. You have a physical link to a location in Kansas, and if you're not actually living there, you have an intent to return. So college students can either register to vote where they live, usually their parents' address, or where they are at college. It can only be one or the other. It can't be both. So a KU student could be either in Lawrence or their parents' home, but they can't be both. It can only be one or the other.
How would you know if it was both?
Well, if they're inside Kansas, then the person can only be registered in one place, and we do that deduplication right before the election. If somebody is in two states, it's a little harder. We do state-to-state voter roll comparisons. We have agreements with some other states where we try to find people that are registered in both, which just usually means they've moved, and we have to try to get the older registration off, again, by making sure the voter lets us know to take them off or wait a certain amount of time.
So if she was in New York City, she could have registered in New York City. Do they have an agreement with you that you can look at each other's voter rolls, or they'll indicate that?
New York, Senator.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Blue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to go back to the question I asked Jason earlier about when people do move, again, even if it's just a block over, you're in possibly a totally different precinct, so forth. What can we do on that end legislatively? Do we need to have a better agreement with the DMV, with the Secretary of State's office, to make sure that people are changing their voter registration? I say that because I know for a fact another situation that happened in Great Bend. Somebody lived in Great Bend, moved outside of town, but they wanted to make sure that they could still vote in the mayor election because there was a hot race. But the poll worker said, "I know you don't live here." So who's at fault at that point? Can that person vote? And what do we need to do to make sure that we're having people voting in the right districts?
Excellent question, Senator, and I've heard anecdotal stories of people living in the county, township land, but wanting to vote in the city. Maybe they have a business there and they want different tax structures. I've heard lots of reasons. Well, when the person comes up to vote, they have to write either on the mail ballot, write their residence address, or they tell the poll worker will ask them, you still at this address, and they have to verify it. And if the address is changed, they'll have to re-register right there, and they get a provisional ballot, which means they can only vote where their address is if that's still on the same ballot, like maybe the same Senate district, but different something else district. But that is a constant challenge of, like I said, how many people move constantly in Kansas, that churn of the voter rolls keeping track of where they live to make sure the person votes in the right district. Because everyone is supposed to be associated with a spot on the ground to decide what districts they can vote in. And it can become a challenge. There's issues with homeless or nomadic Americans that live in RVs and drive around, just how to assign them to a spot on the ground that is their residence. So I don't have an easy answer for you on that one, Senator. Moving inside a county is tough because people don't think of changing their voter registration, especially if they've moved only a short distance. It just doesn't seem to be top of their list.
Senator Tyson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your testimony, Clay. My best to Brian. He does a great job, and I know he's very meticulous. We had a situation with the post office. They had a system where they merged addresses and everything, and they were always correcting our address and making it incorrect. So Brian is doing these checks, or somebody is doing these checks manually to it's not a software system, is my question, that's making these decisions.
And again, Senator, we use, for instance, the national change of address from the U.S. Postal Service, but only about 40% of people that move use that. But that, again, we don't just automatically change because the name appears on that list. We have to verify things before we'll change a residence address. We just don't take raw data from another database and change the voter registration rolls. That's what the voter has to do, or in strict accordance with the law if somebody's removed.
Okay, that's good to hear, because that software system, the post office does have problems, major problems. And I would also ask a follow-up, if I may, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. On this, I'm trying to, I think this is great what you're trying to do and get through and tighten the voter rolls. As you said, we have a good system, but any system can be improved. And so I just want to make sure that, I don't know, I hear about a lot of faults. Okay, we had another situation, I guess I'll just divulge it. A family member in a temporary living space, and they were blind, and the temporary living space literally changed the voter registration. What can we do to stop stuff like that? I hear those stories. I know it sounds anecdotal, but it's not necessarily. So what do you do in that situation?
So you mean the staff at the location changed it for the voter? It should always be the voter changing it.
Voter was blind and didn't know they were signing their voter registration. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Senator Fausto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I agree with some parts of this legislation. Other parts I have concerns with, particularly sometimes in my Senate district, and we did try to address this within the law, within the Secretary of State's office and our local election offices. So if a polling place changes, it relocates, maybe there's construction going on or some other reason. So individuals will show up there because they've been voting there, but they didn't receive the notification in the mail from the election office saying that that voting location has changed. So then they'll go to their next voting location, and then so the address doesn't match, but they still don't know where they need to go. Then they are forced to vote provisionally because it doesn't. So I would ask that you and the Secretary of State's office, and let those election offices know that there is a law that if your voting poll location changes, that voter needs to be notified. That's one way to fix that. And Clay Barker, we actually have, and maybe we should discontinue this, Mr. Chairman. So when you go to register to vote, you get a little card that tells you, your voting location, your Senate district, your congressional district, et cetera. But we don't even use that anymore, Mr. Chairman. And then here's of the previous conversation, I've made that statement, Mr. Chairman, but here's my question to you, Clay. So I'm concerned about this part. I know a lot of people that live in Wichita, but they work there in the aircraft industry. So they work in other states and locations, and they're required to have other identification for that area. So I'm concerned about that piece just because they have, so put a provision in there that protects that individual who lives and resides here but works here, and they have separate identification pieces. And then I have to look at you to see, and Jason Long's head moved, so I had to follow you again. But what I'm also concerned, no, go ahead, Jason, I can. So, but what I'm concerned, my question is this. So how, right now, current law, that if I don't vote in every election, maybe I only vote in a presidential election. So what is the current time that you're going to remove my name just because I didn't vote in every election? Or if I don't vote in every presidential election, how many do I have to miss before you're going to remove my name? I just think, the time that we have now is working because of technology. We make errors. And so what is the current time that before you remove my name, if I don't vote, or if you think I've moved, but I didn't?
All right, Senator, to answer your last question first, the way the current law works, and this was added in a year or two ago, if a registered voter there's no election activity, was the phrase voting or attempting to vote, for 4 years, that includes one presidential cycle, and remember, a third of Kansas voters only vote one time every 4 years for president, then we send out a confirmation notice. If that comes back as addressee unknown, which indicates they probably moved, it's not the inactivity. The inactivity just allows us to check if they've moved. Then we have to wait 2 federal election cycles, which could be 3 or 4 years, depending, and only then can the voter be removed. So it's not inactivity alone that takes a voter off. You can never remove someone just for not voting, but it's not voting for a lengthy period of time is a signal they may have moved, and then we try to get verification. On your other 2 questions, on the polling place, counties have to change their polling places, or not frequently, but because of budget issues. Sometimes churches are a little leery of being a polling place because of all the partisan activity. Wichita did a great job of getting the schools to be polling places, which some counties do and some don't. And on the ID, and also there's a provision in law that if a polling place changes when I think 30 days of an election, there has to be a lot of emergency notification and signs put up, which can happen if pipes break or something like that. And your last question about ID is, yes, a person can be, and our Supreme Court has upheld this several times, you're a Kansas resident, you vote in a particular place in Kansas, but you suddenly have to work outside the state for a year or 2, but you intend to come back, you're only registered in Kansas, you can still vote there. Now, maybe by mail, you may drive back in and do it, and even though that's why we allow non-state ID to be used for your name picture. Sometimes people will get a driver's license in another state just for, it's easier in that state, but you're still a Kansas voter because you're a Kansan who plans to return.
Okay. Time for one more, Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you sort of touched on my deal. The military has not been mentioned yet, but that's similar deal. Got a son that was in Tennessee. When his license came due, he ended up getting a Tennessee license, but he still had his permanent residence was still Kansas, and so but it's good to see. I think you've got that covered to protect those things. I appreciate it.
Oh, do you have one more question, Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm just wondering, when you send out, or you get information from the Division of Motor Vehicles and find out that someone has moved, are you also able to notify the new county if they've moved within Kansas?
Senator, that's in the bill. I don't have the exact procedure yet, but that would be,
That would be allowed.
the new count, they'd have to register in the new county, and that's up to the voter if they want to do that or not. It's notifying the old county, this person's probably moved, and we send out that confirmation notice to make sure that we have proof of the move, in addition to the DMV list.
So I appreciate that, and would also, like, I appreciate what you're doing, and anything you can do to add residence halls at universities to the list of people that may have moved would be helpful. Thank you.
We're aware of that, Senator, is if you were to look at a heat map of where inactive voters are, there's always hot spots at fraternity houses and residence halls. So students will register at college, move to another state, and they never respond to anything, and the residency hall just dumps it in the trash. So we get no response to prove the person's moved. We're aware of that.
Thank you very much, Clay. Appreciate that. We do have one more in-person, actually WebEx testimony from Greg Sealer. He's not on. Greg dropped off. Okay. So we have written-only proponent testimony from Madeline Melissa. That's in your packet, and also on the internal drive from FGA Action. Or have opponent in-person testimony from Logan DeMond of ACLU. Logan, welcome to Fed and State.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Logan DeMond. I'm the Director of Policy and Research with the American Civil Liberties Union of Kansas. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that works to protect and strengthen the civil rights and liberties of all Kansans, and we're here this morning to oppose House Bill 2437. I'd like to begin by pointing out, first and foremost, that there is no evidence of widespread fraud in Kansas elections. There's no evidence, especially among non-citizens, of voting in Kansas elections. I think the Secretary of State's office would agree and has in fact said that before. I'd also like to begin by pointing out the high error rate in database matching, particularly citizenship database matching. In addition to broadening the scope of unreliable data sources to purge voters from the rolls, that's what this bill can be boiled down to, data matching. What we'll see if this bill passes are eligible citizens wrongfully flagged, even removed, increasing the risk of disenfranchisement, putting the burden on them to come in and prove their status. It's also important to point out the privacy errors that occurred when then Secretary of State Chris Kobach entered into a data sharing agreement similar to this that exposed the personal information of nearly 1,000 Kansas voters and was settled in the cross-check lawsuit. Section 8 and Section 2 specifically draw my attention to that. We've been down this road before as a state. We don't have to do it again. Now, the House also amended this bill to include 2 annual checks against the SAVE database, which was not created to unnecessarily investigate the citizenship status of voters. It was created to investigate those who were applying for public benefits. Now, when the Department of Government Efficiency got their hands on this list, they refused to publicly disclose how they were using this information, what other federal databases they were combining it with. A clear violation of the Freedom of Information Act. This bill isn't much different in terms of transparency. In fact, it would exempt large swaths of information from the Kansas Open Records Act until 2031, at a time when faith in democracy is at an all-time low. This bill won't allow for errors, patterns of discrimination, or administrative failures to be identified by advocates, by journalists, or by voters themselves. We cannot afford this bill, we can't afford the mistakes that it will lead to, and we cannot afford a lack of transparency. For these reasons, I encourage each of you to vote no on House Bill 2437. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Logan. And we do have some written-only opponent testimony from 4 different people, but we'll open to questions for Logan from the committee. Any questions? Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony. Would you expand on the portion of lack of transparency or harming transparency? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may. Thank you, Senator, for the question. I want to point out that we appreciate the efforts to secure people's information, right? We don't want to be exposing everyone's information to the public. Joe Schmo also isn't asking for this information. When this tool is in the wrong hands, it can be very dangerous. We're not asking for Social Security numbers to be released to these individuals. What we're saying is that the public deserves to know how this information is being used and be able to identify what some of those patterns are when we're identifying and even removing some of these voters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm with you on protecting information and data, but you lost me on how this would create a secrecy around the system. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? Oh, Senator Fausto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Logan, how do you feel this might be confusing to the voters?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, thank you for the question. I think this puts an additional burden on voters who are identified. You know, when we're talking about data matching, there are errors that occur. Hyphenated names, typographical errors, outdated records, all of these things can flag individuals, and suddenly someone who might not be an active voter, might not be tuned into this hearing, and the 5 people who might be watching on YouTube are suddenly shocked to hear that I've got to come in and prove not only that I am who I am and I am where I am, but my citizenship status as well. You know, when we're talking about what we should be focused on, it's making it easier for eligible citizens to participate in our elections. I think that's important to point out. This moves us in a direction of putting an additional burden on the voters to cast their vote.
Any other questions? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So is that additional burden on the citizens or is it on the Secretary of State's office? Because what I was hearing was that they get the information and then it's their job to notify the county officials, and the county official then needs to be able to verify that someone's moved. It's not, you know, and I'm hearing if they don't get a response back, that doesn't mean they're taken off the list. They still have that 8 more years that they're on the list. So what is the step that the citizen themselves have to take outside of what the county clerks are doing?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, thank you for the question. I think it's, as I mentioned to the previous senator, it's asking this voter or notifying them that they are flagged, risk being removed from the rolls, and asking them to verify, right? I can't speak to process exactly what that would look like in practice. Perhaps the Secretary of State can address that again. But it is asking someone to step in and say, I am who I am, this is where I am a citizen in this instance.
Mr. Chair, I would really appreciate it if Clay Barker could come back and respond to that, and because I want to make sure that I understand this process. When I heard him describe it, the situation with the fraternities and sororities were that people didn't respond to that, and therefore the names stayed on the roll. So I would like to make sure that that's my accurate understanding.
We'll allow that if, Clay, if you want to come up and respond to that.
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I'll give you a few examples. First of all, if a voter is ever removed by mistake, someone like Senator Dietrich shows up and says, I am alive despite what my children said, she'd be given a provisional ballot and there'd be the election staff would try to verify what happened. Did we get the wrong person, but someone showed up who's clearly alive? Same with the residence change, even citizenship. Where residence change is a little different is it's on the state to go through all the legal hoops. We have a factual predicate, we've waited the amount of time, we sent the correct notice, then the person's removed. Citizenship, because of this new SAVE database, we're still going through creating our procedures. But we do it all at state level because we have access to different databases and ability to follow up and start doing granular follow-ups. And the very last step, and we've not gotten there with anyone yet, but we're close on a few, is to send that individual registered voter a certified letter saying, we believe you are not a citizen, you have 30 days to respond, and then prove otherwise. And you could get a response, I suppose, you got me. Or the person would say, I am a citizen, and here's my naturalization papers, and the SAVE database was inaccurate. And I agree with the ACLU's testimony is these other databases, we don't always know exactly how accurate they are, which is why we don't trust them completely. We do our own validation. And the last sometimes with citizens is they didn't even realize they were on the voter list. They may say, I'm not a citizen, I didn't even know I registered. It may have been a mistake from years and years ago, in which case they'll be taken off. That's the one time the voter actually has some burden as the very last step to refute what we believe we found factually. But again, death, we have records, but the person can show up and say, I'm still alive. Residents, they can challenge that they really haven't moved. They've always been here. They just didn't know what happened. Felony status, I'm sorry. If the punishment's finished, the person can re-register to vote. And that's going to be on them to make sure they finish their sentence and the punishment, and they go back in and register.
And I heard correctly earlier that in terms of citizenship, we're talking about single digits in terms of the number of people who you find in checking that database.
Right now, I believe, Senator, there's 2 have been indicted for being non-citizens who were voting. The Coldwater mayor's one. I think there's one more coming, and then Mr. Caskey told me, I believe it's less than 10. We're going to hand over to the Attorney General to do an investigation where they almost duplicate what we've done to verify it, then we check with the voter. But those haven't been taken over yet, so it's still probably single digits right now in the state.
I appreciate that, and I know that there was one situation where an individual joined the military, was told to go get their driver's license. The driver's license people said, here, sign up for voter registration. It was someone who was not fluent in English and never intended to be on that list, so following up on that makes sense.
So the crime of voting as a non-citizen or registering requires intent. It's just not an administrative mistake.
Senator Thomas and then Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Clay. Since I have you up here, I might as well ask you. So the way I understand it, the proof of citizenship was struck down in some form or fashion in court. Is that right?
Senator, Kansas in 2011 passed documentary proof of citizenship, and that required when you registered to vote, you had to prove you were a citizen, and there were multiple ways of doing that. That was enjoined in federal court in 2018, I believe, and the 10th Circuit upheld it. It said Kansas cannot implement those laws. The laws are still in the books, we just can't enforce them. And the court recommended, instead of being a screen at the initial step of registering, that the state put its resources and efforts on finding the people who may be non-citizens on the voter rolls. They suggested the SAVE database, even though it's changed somewhat since that order came out, DMV records, like temporary driver's license, which is what the legislature's allowed us to do. So we can't pre-screen, but we try to identify people once they're on.
So we're kind of getting off on a bit of a tangent here, because this bill is really about data sharing more than anything else. It's not about
this. It's about different tools to maintain the voter rolls.
Right.
Some of it's data sharing, some of it's death attestations. It's just different tools we can use to try to flag people and then follow up and validate.
So it's not a bill about citizenship and all that, because we're kind of getting off a little bit on a tangent here. It's strictly about data sharing. And so I think some of the conversations are kind of getting us off the focus of the actual bill itself, just my opinion.
Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Clay. So I appreciate the intent on this, and you've kind of brought to my attention that, okay, you guys are good actors, and you're trying to protect the data and do what's right and cross-check these databases. What happens if the next person in that position is not of that caliber of check?
Instead, if someone were to get a list of 1,000 possible non-citizens and just...
I'm saying if you get a new Secretary of State that doesn't work as diligently as you guys may, as...
We believe a lot of the information we want to protect when we do our internal processes, I think it's pretty obvious, should not be let out to the public because, again, you don't want your neighbor being accused of being a non-citizen and then people start posting things online about them when they are a citizen. But again, when the actual formal change is done to the voter rolls, that has to be public, and why. So you could ask a list of who's been removed for dying in the last year, who's been removed for felony. That's all public record.
So if I may, this legislation would help put those parameters for the next Secretary of State to protect it if they weren't as diligent as you guys.
Believe so, Senator, because it makes that information exempt from public disclosure. And we believe it probably is exempt already. But again, I have to go through a menu of CORA exemptions to make sure I've covered every aspect of these requests. And some of these requests are 25 separate requests. They're all essentially asking for the same thing in different ways.
Committee, I think we're probably going to need to wrap this up on this hearing. Thank you, Clay. Thank you, Logan. Appreciate it. Again, there's opponent testimony available so we'll close the hearing on HB 2437. We have just a few minutes. I would like to work one bill if we could, and that's HB 2635. And Jason, if we could give us a quick bill overview for a reminder, that's the bill we heard yesterday.
Yes. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, House Bill 2635 would enact the Pregnancy Center Autonomy and Rights of Expression Act. The bill provides certain statutory protections regarding the practices and operations of pregnancy centers and medical pregnancy centers as defined under the bill. This would prohibit the state or any municipality from adopting any law, regulation, or other requirement for such centers to make referrals for counsel in favor of abortions or abortion-inducing drugs, promote or provide information regarding abortions and abortion-inducing drugs, or to prohibit them from carrying out their current activities on the basis that they do not provide or make referrals or counsel in favor of abortion or abortion-inducing drugs. It would also prohibit the interference with the staffing and hiring decisions of such centers. There is a private cause of action provided for centers who are aggrieved by a violation of the act, and Section 6 authorizes the legislature to appoint one or more members of the legislature to intervene as a matter of right in any legal proceeding challenging the constitutionality or enforcement of the act.
Any questions for Jason? Seeing none, I'm not aware of any amendments on this bill. Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We were busy, as you remember, yesterday with the budget, and so I did not get back yet, and surprised that we're doing this today. But I have several changes that I would like to see in the bill. One is to strike Section 2 from the bill. We have not had any information presented to us through legislative post-audit or any other group about information that we would have to be able to make these declarations. In particular, the testimony that we heard, and I was going to check this before this discussion, but the testimony that we heard from individuals who had gone to a center was that they did not believe that they necessarily got appropriate advice. So it's one thing to hear from the people who are running the center to say, we're doing everything we should, but I did not take the time to look through any other proponent testimony. So,
So is that a conceptual amendment to strike
it's a
Section 2?
conceptual amendment to strike Section 2.
Well, is there a second on that? Second by Senator Falscato. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment say aye. All those opposed, no? No. Okay, the motion fails. Senator Francisco?
The second issue that I think was brought up was with the definition of pregnancy center, because we do have other clinics, and particularly Planned Parenthood, that works with people, and in some cases was the only clinic available in a community to help individuals who have become pregnant and getting information and advice. I know that Planned Parenthood has parenthood in the name. The intent is really to help those individuals, and I do not have a definition, but to say a pregnancy center just means that you don't perform abortions. This I think this is wider than what other pregnancy centers may be, because it starts out saying a nonprofit organization that does not perform abortions. Well, there's a lot of nonprofit organizations. Then again, I'm concerned. We left, the committee decided to leave in Section 2. Section 2 says pregnancy centers provide important support for women who choose childbirth over abortion, and yet some of what we heard is they're here to help people, even if they feel an abortion is important to them, but that's not how we're defining pregnancy center, and that's what we're not using in our declaration.
Is that a motion or just a discussion, I guess? Or if you want to bring
I would like to bring a definition of pregnancy center.
on the floor, if we work this, give you time to do that. My reasoning is that we've got a packed schedule. I've got a whole lot of stuff coming up, and so.
We have a packed schedule, and this is a House bill, so we don't really need to get it done immediately.
Well, in this case, I think the train is moving down the track, so I would probably accept one on the floor on this one. Senator Thomas?
Well, I think I may be new here, but my understanding is after turnaround, the Senate does tend to work House bills.
Okay. Senator Francisco?
Thank you. I understand we're working House bills.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that if we have, and we have some other Senate bills still on our schedule.
We do.
And those,
And so I'm trying to make room for those as well that we're trying to,
okay, and I appreciate
agenda's
your
pretty
being willing to let me bring an amendment to the floor, but I think I have that right as a senator. Thank you.
okay, thank you. Senator Vasquito?
Mr. Chairman, you're the chairman, so we follow your lead. However, with a situation this important and this emotional from the young lady that testified, I think the facts that Senator from Douglas is asking, you know, couldn't we do it early? Let her get that information and just do it tomorrow early? Because it's just going to be a vote and it's going to be given.
We've got 4 bills we're hearing tomorrow. Yeah, we are hearing 4 tomorrow, and then we've only got next week to work. That's, I'd prefer, I mean, this is one of these deals where we put it on the calendar, we're potential working the bills, so. Senator Thomas?
I think we have the bill. We started working it. Obviously, amendments can be brought in here. They can be made conceptually. They can be brought on the floor. I mean, it's all part of the process. I know I stood up once before on the Senate floor and said that, and I agree with the process. If the will of the chair is to work the bill, then we all have a right to conceptually amend it in here, and we all have a right to amend it on the floor as well. So I would support moving forward with the bill.
Is that a motion to move the bill?
Sure, I call the question.
Okay, so, yeah, just motion the bill. So we have a motion to approve House Bill 2635 favorably. Is there a second? Second by Senator Blue. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no? Okay. Do you want that recorded? Okay, very good. Committee, thank you for your work today. We appreciate it. It was a very good discussion, and we are adjourned.